I am your host Rim bin Muhammad Rafi, and here is my YouTube channel Jumeir Universal. Today I am going to tell you about, because everybody talks about Palestine and everybody talks about the God's chosen people, these Jews, that they have the right to this land, and so this is why they came here, and being left over by Hitler, so few who are not put in the incinerator or in the gas chambers, they came, and you can see the troublemakers, how in the whole world they have done nothing but made trouble. If you look at the porn business, they are behind it. If you look at these competitions of the beautiful women in the world, they are behind it. The fur industry, they are behind it. Modeling industry, they are behind it. Sodomization, they are behind it. LGBT, they are behind it. If you look at every sinful thing, child molestation, they are the one who are promoting this thing, and they are spreading this thing. So nothing else satanic is left which these Jews are not doing. So you don't have to wonder why they kill the babies when they are being pulled out without their head, without their arms, without their limbs, or they are, you see, the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years old in the wheelchair with the leg amputated. Not only there, the Palestinian or Gaza or Rafah or Central Gaza or school kids, or you could see the timing, then even they tell their soldiers to, and the pilots, and they congratulate them once they have dropped their 5,000 pounds of bombs on schools and killed these children. So they are not human beings, they are beasts. And the history, a little bit of that I can't put the whole series because it's a too long video, otherwise it will tell you that the history is not the biblical history. If you look at the archaeological history, then the oldest tree in the world is from Palestine, which is 65,000 years old. So Palestine existed, or the land that existed, way before Jesus Christ or Moses or these people. Even they talk nonsense about Prophet Abraham, and they talk about Canaan. It's not so. So they twist their history, and they purposely start their history from the Bible, and they try and fit in the jigsaw puzzle what it suits them. And this is where the evangelical took their birth. And so they are you see in yourself the Christian Zionists, and then you see how they are bosom friends with the Jewish Zionists. They don't believe in God, but they claim that the land is given to them by God, to which they don't believe in it. So I will just try and correct you to this, especially to the students of history, that it's not so. Palestine is the oldest civilization, and Palestine was way ahead in culture, in agriculture, in their farming, in their travel, in their write-up, in science, even in their oceans, in the astronomy, mathematics, they were way ahead of them before any other civilization. So when you talk about this nonsense, the British, they carved and they gave it to these scum of this society from Eastern Europe, that's not true. So this fight is not 1 year, 2 years, 100 years, or 200 years old. This fight is thousands and thousands of years ago. This is before even the prophet Moses was born. So I think it's a nonsense to link the history with the Bible, or the rest with their, the Jews with the Torah. That's not true. It's religion there is being used for their own purposes, to just grab the land and just kill them. And you can see the conspiracy behind that, and I'll play a few clips of a historian which will just open your eyes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا لي قولي. Thank you all for being in here today. So if I could get the presentation up, please, inshallah. So what I'm focusing today on is from occupation to apartheid and colonization. And for us, it's important to understand how to frame and understand Palestine as a cause that both for Muslims as well as anyone that is dedicated for human rights at a global level. What I want people to, if you want to come out of this discussion, is one, Palestine is not a conflict between two people that don't understand each other. Right? It's not a communication problem that you could hire a public relations firm that possibly sells what you call Fair and Lovely or Coca-Cola products, and we could get together and have a retreat and come out with a communication problem that is solved. So that's important. Second, it's not a problem of occupation, even though the Palestinians are occupied. Because occupation implies that there is one state occupying another state. So it's not an occupation, even though that it is part of an occupation. And what we need is to understand specifically how to understand Palestine. So I will get into my presentation, but before I go, if you could scan this QR code and make sure to sign the petition. This is the petition from American. This colonial archaeology results in transformation of the names of areas, names of regions, and as early as 1865, the British had a whole project for documenting and mapping Palestine archaeologically as it relates to the biblical text. Now, anyone that, again, looks at the field of archaeology, every time you dug something in Palestine, a Canaanite came out jumping, right? Because the oldest population in Palestine are the Canaanites, right? Even in the Bible, using just as a historical text, it said that the prophet Abraham migrated from Mesopotamia to the land of the Canaanites. It says that Abraham spoke the language of the Canaanites. More importantly, it says that he lived as an alien among the Canaanites. Right? I say that Palestinians gave him an early green card, right, to live among them. This is important because you have what you call the Zionists using the religious text, even though if you listen to Ilan Pape, he said that most Zionists don't believe in God, but they believe that God gave them the land. That's what Ilan Pape, I think it was a beautiful summation, that Zionism is a secular project, secular nationalist project, utilize religious discourse to justify their project. They don't believe in God, but they do believe that God gave them the land. So every once in a while you get a Zionist that opens and say, well, this is what God says. But God says something else, 2-3 pages down the line. Often the argument, which is also for individuals who are arguing and talking about Palestine, history of Palestine does not begin with the Bible. Okay, let me repeat this. History of Palestine does not begin with the Bible. Even if you take the Bible to look at it as both as a spiritual and historical text, it dates back to 1000 BC. Even some say it was written I'm talking about the Old Testament, around 570 during the exile period. The history of Palestine can be traced from archaeological discovery to about 35,000 years. The oldest olive tree in the world is in Palestine. It's 6,500 years old. All right? The archaeological discoveries point to Palestine being the earliest place of civilization, agriculture, domestication of animal, irrigation system, the oldest city in Jericho, or some say Jericho or Damascus. So again, when you begin by saying 1000 BC, you're accepting biblical Zionist narrative that begins to say that Palestine belonged to us because we were there 1000 BC. Now there is no dispute that the early Jewish community post-Moses period came to Palestine. That's not a dispute. But if we look at historical progression, the longest control over Palestine is actually the Egyptian. The longest rule of Palestine is actually the Egyptian rule during various periods. So the fact that the Jews came to Palestine from outside does not negate the history before, during, and after. I think sometimes Muslims who begin to engage in this discussion, they begin to enter into a debate about the Bible, the history and so on, and in doing so you erase the history of the Canaanites, the history of Palestine in general, sometimes of good intention, but good intention by themselves are not sufficient. So we need to understand, when we say centering Palestinian history, is centering history as history, which is different than religious history. And again, to those who understand, religious history is not akin to history. Right? There is a distinction in here. Doesn't mean that you don't learn lessons, but in doing so, you often erase Palestinian history. Even if you think about the digging around Jerusalem, right, the oldest wall in relation to Jerusalem, it dates back to the Canaanites. We know again from the religious narrative that when Abraham migrated to Palestine, it was already a vibrant society. Right? So again, very important in understanding in this. Western Christianity has to be held responsible as much as Zionism for adopting and wanting to push for the Zionist colonial project for its own interest. Because again, in here you're in the South with the evangelical right, the Hagee and the Friends of Israel. They're supporting Israel not because all of a sudden they love the Jewish community, or all of a sudden they discovered that they hate Muslims. They're equal opportunity, they hate both. But they believe, this is again their own theology, speculative theology, that the return of Jesus is situated on the support for the state of Israel, the reconstituting of the children of Israel in Palestine. And when Jesus comes, you ask the question, Philip Hagee, what happens? Well, 2/3 of the Jews will be killed, and 1/3 will convert to Christianity, while the Muslims are seen to be from the realm of Satan. We don't even qualify to an affirmative action inclusion. We don't even have the possibility of conversion. That's their own theology. You don't take my word for it. Go and look at, Christian Zionism and what their belief system in this sense. So they are using speculative theology, evangelical speculative theology, to push for support for Israel for their own purposes. And if the Muslims and Jews kill each other, might as well they're supporting actors in a theater piece that they are actually not actors in it. The role of Muslims and Jews or Southern Hemisphere is for us to bring the tea on the stage, give it to the Western evangelical Western civilization, and exit stage left. Because there is only one true history from their perspective, is the history that is contained in the biblical narrative as it's been interpreted, understood with their speculative theology. Okay? That is an important piece to understand, because you ask, why the evangelicals are so much supportive of Israel? Or also some other mainstream Christian groups that sometimes they still would support it because theologically they find argumentation to it. And increasingly you find some of the black churches using that same logic as well. So it's very important to understand that this is part of the discourse that we're dealing with. And it was present in colonial discourse as well. Many of you possibly understood manifest destiny, right? The white man burden, that we want to civilize the world and Christianize the world. And there was a debate, throughout on this notion. That debate still have an effect in relations to Palestine. So that's very, very important in this sense. So these are the 6 features that we need to understand when we are discussing Palestine. Right? Otherwise, you really are entering into conversation and you're getting lost in the minutiae or the details all that is there. Now let me shift a little bit to speak about the most recent development. So this should be the framework behind in the back of your minds. Palestinians today in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as well as 48, are feeling the impact of the Oslo Agreement. If you don't know the Oslo Agreement, it's an agreement that was signed in September 13, 1993, by which the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, recognized Israel, while Israel recognized the PLO as the agency or as the group to negotiate with Israel for final solution, or the final status for the Palestinian areas. Through that agreement, it actually led to the decentering of the PLO, which is actually very, the PLO was not as, I would say, not as smart as they thought they are. Because they thought that Israel recognizing the PLO as the agency to negotiate with Israel will bring PLO into center stage. It actually decentered the PLO, and in its place created the Palestinian Authority. And it became the focus of negotiations. Now I written around what happened for Oslo immediately thereafter. I said at the time that Israel, as a result of the first uprising, was accustomed to having its own style of colonization. It wanted its own form. It wanted to control every neighborhood. It wanted to know how much beans there is in each falafel. It wanted to monitor the amount of sugar in each of the kinafas all over the West Bank. Literally, they wanted 4 reports from each corner in every part of the West Bank. That security structure collapsed as a result of the uprising. So Israel was actually searching for a new model or a way to replace its security structure. So the Oslo Agreement brought the Palestinian Authority as a security structure to secure Israel's settlements and settlers from the Palestinians. All right, so again, it began to be that Israel brought the Palestinian Authority to be its security infrastructure to secure its own population, settler populations in the West Bank. I compared it to South Africa. During the apartheid period, the ANC was leading the anti-apartheid movement. The South Africa apartheid structure engaged Chief Buthelezi and projected that Chief Buthelezi is the leader of the black South Africans, opposite Nelson Mandela, who was in jail. And for a period of time, the South African white apartheid regime succeeded in projecting that image. But as the intensity of opposition to the South Africa apartheid structure became more pronounced, Chief Buthelezi was ineffective in maintaining hold of the black population, and the ANC was successful in opposing and ending apartheid South Africa's regime with the support of the international community. I argue then, and I can maintain, that the Palestinian Authority was brought to reconstitute a classical form of colonization where you recruit a small group of the indigenous colonized people and you empower them to rule over the colonial subject while protecting the colonial population, and you protect the infrastructure of the colonial enterprise. We saw it in India. Again, for those who are aware, British created native courts. They engaged with relations with the Raj that gave them power over the population, and most of the Indians often were oppressed by other Indians who were in relationship to the British. That's what the Israelis and Zionists moved with the Oslo Agreement, and the Palestinian Authority accepted this. The Oslo also severed relations with the young population. So you actually find a demarcation, especially post-2000. The young Palestinian population were completely disconnected from the broader discourse that was taking place post the signing of Oslo. That also was positive because they did not have the same fears or the same impediments that were present in the older generation, without problematizing those who are old, because some are old but still young in resisting, while there are some young that are old in relations to giving up. So again, this is not the framing. But it severed structurally that relationship. It removed Palestine from communal organizing space. For those who know the Palestinians in the United States, during the 80s, the 90s, the Palestinians were connected to the Palestinian structure. You actually used to relate to PLO work, flyers, material, fact sheets, information. Post-Oslo, and I would point from 1993 till today, I would challenge anyone within the Palestinian community nationally to have received a fact sheet, a study or analysis that is coming from the PLO. More importantly, part of Oslo required that the PLO should withdraw its international aspect of its work, which means it actually disempowered the PLO, which at the time was far more recognized internationally than Israel. But Oslo has also weakened the Palestinians in a transnational way. There was an emergence of Islamic organizations, which again AMP can be one of that. But with it also, this is something that we need to critique, the normalization camp. What do I mean by normalization? Most likely you heard recently about the critique of ISNA and its relationship with AJC, the American Jewish Committee. Also, most likely you heard of what's called the MLI, Muslim Leadership Initiative, that was taking young Muslims from America to take them on a fully paid trip by the Zionists to Palestine, so they would understand how Palestine is important to the American Jewish community, which is a normalization. And when they come back, they speak Zionist language, right? They blame the Palestinians. They would say that they were inspired by what they saw. on a fully paid trips, and this whole interfaith washing that has developed. More importantly also, the normalization in the Muslim world. The countries that have recognized Israel, whether it's United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Mauritania, Egypt, Jordan. There is a press on Sudan. Bangladesh has a commercial interest office for Israel. Qatar likewise have engaged in normalizations in one way or the other. And also Turkey has a long-standing diplomatic relation, so I'm an equal opportunity in my critique in this sense. But normalization, that Israel becomes a partner in the region rather than being seen as a colonial enterprise. And increasingly people say, well, you know, we just live and let live. Well, that's okay, live and let live. Well, they're not letting us live to begin with. Right? They're demolishing Palestinian homes daily. We're in the 21st century, right? We're on June, right, 5th, 2021. And we have on the newspapers settlers taking over Palestinian homes in Sheikh Jarrah. You know, if we read this in the 1500s, like when Columbus got lost on his way to India and the native discovered that he was lost and there was settlements, we would understand this. But we're in the 21st century, right? And the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Uncle Biden saying that Israel has the right to defend itself in stealing Palestinian homes in Sheikh Jarrah and building settlements. And more importantly, your State Department saying that settlements are only an impediment to peace. Settlements are illegal under international law that you developed, not us. Right? I did not write the 4 Geneva Convention. Right? I read it, but it's not me. Right? When Europe, maybe I'll get a little bit in here. When Europe massacred the world in World War I and World War II, they got together and wrote the 4 Geneva Convention. It's your convention that says we have a set of rules by which we're going to adhere because we're not going to allow what we did, not me, but Europe, what Europe did, causing the death of 50 to 70 million people. We're not going to allow it to happen. That's the 4 Geneva Convention passed in 1949 after the Second World War. So, 4 Geneva Convention, you wrote it. State Department, you have a specialist. We have a professor at UC Berkeley, John Yoo, who said that the 4 Geneva Convention is a passé, it's no longer applicable because he wrote the memos for torture in Iraq, which got the United States in trouble. We found that the 4 Geneva Convention is still one of the documents that governs how we relate in times of war. So Mr. Biden, Bilkin in the State Department, for the settlements are not impediment to peace, they are war crimes and illegal under your document, not ours. So we're in the 21st century and we're still talking about settlements, settlers. So it's not live and let live. They're not letting us live and we're not living. And I'm not touching the Gaza Strip. 65% of it is refugees from 1948, ethnically cleansed. The largest open-air prison that's still day in and day out being bombed. Water that is no longer, the UN said by 2020, that's last year, before even COVID, that the water is no longer usable for human consumption. That's 2020. After 2021 now, what is it used for? The calorie intake of Gaza is the only place on earth where the height of people are diminishing because your calorie intake are causing stunted growth among the Gazan population. What is the world response? Our politicians here, Hamas, 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 Hamas is like hummus, Hamas, they're confusing it. All right? They don't understand the difference. You speak to them about human rights, it's Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. Again, this is what you call a problem, musmar juha. The juha is this funny character, it's musmar juha. Using that to have an F-16 bombing, right? All these residential towers. And the Israeli pilot said is actually just to vent out. It's a war crime. Our politicians say Israel has the right to defend itself. Venting out. That's why these apartment buildings were hit, not because there is Hamas, not because it is venting. That's a pilot saying what the reason for bombing these residential spaces. And when the media building gets bombed, the media apologizes. Right? The AP building was completely bombed to smithereens. In any other context, I bet you, again, I said in the Washington, D.C. march, I come from Berkeley. If a cat gets stuck on the tree, we'll get a petition to try to create the environment so the cat would not get stuck on the tree. If a dog gets to be what you call injured, we'll have a march down in order to get the city council to make changes to make the streets safe for the dog. Rightly so. My students are the ones that hugged the tree and went and climbed the tree in order to prevent the cutting of the trees. Rightly so. Again, the Prophet, I said, hugged the tree when he was giving the khutbah and they built a minbar for him. He got on the minbar and he heard the tree, feeling the pain, he hugged the tree to calm it down. So I have no problem with people hugging a tree. I'd rather for you hug a tree than go and actually drink what you call these big gulps and hug it like 54 ounces of complete garbage that people consume. But when it comes to Palestine, all of your liberals, all of your people that have caught on every cause, they're out to Mars with Elon Musk. You don't find them. They're trying to see if they find a Palestinian in Mars to free them. But Palestinians that are there in Palestine are completely forgotten. And they give you the lamest excuses. Well, there's two sides to every, there is two sides to every issue. There is a rape and rapist. There's two sides. But this two sides is one of the easiest escapable discourses that you could get. Because it equalizes between the oppressed and oppressor, the colonized and the colonizer, the victim and the victimizer. So this nonsense of the two sides in a colonial structure, had it been in the United States, you would actually have to go and interview the slave owners. How do you feel, oh slave owner, that your slaves rebelled against you? It must be traumatizing for you, so we need a therapist for you at one of our universities. Because it's really very difficult that all of a sudden 100 slaves escaped from your control and rebelled against you. I know. We need an action in Congress to prohibit slaves from rebelling, which happened. So this discourse of the two-sidedness is
यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें, उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर